TIE Fighter! Yes, the more attentive among you will most likely have spotted that I repeatedly reference TIE Fighter, shoving it into conversations where it clearly doesn't belong at the drop of a hat. Well, this is an actual video about TIE Fighter, so I can reference it as much as I want, okay? The XWVM project continues to be in development, and despite there being no reason for Disney to shut it down, we're all waiting for that axe to fall. In fact, we probably shouldn't draw attention to it. You know, like making a video about it before it's even released. Oh. Here's what their ModDB page says. That ought to hold the lawyers at bay. More importantly, they state that by the time we are done and happy with X-Wing, we will have a flight engine that will be so similar to that of TIE Fighter that it will just be a natural step to support the game's content files. But this is still in the future. So here's 10 reasons why a hypothetical mod that may or may not be created would improve TIE Fighter at some point in the future. Number 1. The graphics. Probably the biggest hurdle for modern Star Wars fans getting into TIE Fighter is the graphics, which are shaded, untextured and running at 640 by 480 in the collector's CD-ROM. The special edition has dated texture mapping and runs at 800 by 600 natively. In short, your average gamer's going to take one look at it and lose interest because beauty is everything these days. Now here's a shot of flying in XWVM. Native widescreen support, higher resolutions, and beautifully rendered models and backdrops. V-Sync and Bloom and anti-aliasing and all these other enhancements make it a lot easier for the layman to finally experience the glory of the Empire. Number 2. Stability. The special edition of TIE Fighter is an absolute mess. So much so that GOG.com disabled the hardware rendering by default. To this day, I've never got it running without frequent crashes on multiple machines, usually right at the end of a complex and lengthy mission. The original and collector's edition of TIE Fighter both require an emulator to play on modern hardware. While DOSBox is generally rock solid, you're forced into picking a specific cycles count in order to make everything work. More on that later. XWVM is Unity based, and hopefully will run as smooth as butter on our battle stations. Number 3. Sound. For the past 22 years, players have been offered a choice. Run TIE Fighter with hardware acceleration but without the contextually responsive iMuse soundtrack, or stick with the collector's edition and accept the graphical trade-off and having no cockpit sounds. Well, XWVM announced nice and early that they'll be using the original scores from Michael Land, fed through a software synthesizer to glorious effect. Just listen to this. Now you really can have your cake and eat it. Number 4. Frame rate. While it's possible to hack or inject your way to 60 frames a second in the special edition, it's about as stable as a Hollywood marriage. The frame rate of the DOS versions can be increased by bumping up the cycles count in DOSBox, but doing so stops certain objects from firing as their operation is cycle dependent. XWVM doesn't suffer from these problems, and neither should you. Number 5. Controls. When I forced Karina to play TIE Fighter, she complained at how difficult the controls were, and how nobody in their right mind would ever need to use the function keys for anything in-game. Well, XWVM proudly carries on that operational standard by controlling exactly the same way, unless you don't want it to. The VM will support joysticks, gamepads, analog sticks, mouse and keyboard. More importantly, players will have the option to control the game in the style of other flight sims like Wing Commander and Freelancer. Anyone will be able to play, and that's a good thing. Number 6. Modding potential. While modding TIE Fighter with new maps was possible and there is a community for it, it never gained the popularity of something like Doom as the source code was never released. While the XWVM team have stated that they won't be making custom campaign content, the door has been left open for additional textures, models, sounds, and possibly campaigns to be created by others. Number 7. Multiplayer. X-Wing vs TIE Fighter introduced the world to multiplayer space dogfights the likes of which it had never seen before. X-Wing Alliance carried on that fine tradition. While the first release of XWVM probably won't contain multiplayer, with connections better than ever it's on the roadmap for future releases. So we can all eventually avoid the screaming teenagers in our headsets courtesy of EA's new Squadrons game. Number 8. Gameplay enhancement. Lead indicators, damage indicators, engine wash effects, a more detailed heads-up display. All these little improvements that have been added by the likes of X-Wing Alliance and the Free Space series can now be retroactively fitted into TIE Fighter, and all the niggling age-related problems quashed. Their technological distinctions will be added to its own. Resistance is futile. No, wait, wrong series. Number 9. Virtual reality! I stumbled upon a YouTuber last year and sat in wonder as they proceeded to play a game from 1993 in virtual reality courtesy of an alpha build of XWVM. Now that would probably leave the likes of me a motion sick mess, but with the way VR is expanding it's clearly the next step to throw you directly into the cockpit, and a very exciting prospect at that. I'll just have to make sure I have a bucket beside me when I get round to it. Number 10. Future-proofing. With no source ports and a dodgy shunting into a now antiquated engine, people will see TIE Fighter listed near the apex of various top countdown articles and wish that it was the mid-90s so they could play it and not think it was absolute garbage. Which it isn't, those graphics are fine. The eventual release of XWVM isn't just important for old players like me, it serves as a preservation effort, so that a newer generation can experience the best space combat game ever made, and realise that games from the past truly were better. Fortunately, it would appear that the team behind XWVM agree with me, and once they've finally released the fruits of their labour, it should be an afterthought to port TIE Fighter and create TFVM. In the meantime, all we can do is continue to survive 2020 and be patient.
For the greater glory of the Empire, destroy everything.
No, guy! No!